Here's a pattern that shows up again and again in couples therapy rooms across the country, described almost the exact same way by both parties in the relationship. One partner says, "I feel like I'm constantly nagging and I hate who I've become in this relationship." The other says, "I feel like I can never do anything right no matter how hard I try, and eventually I just stop trying." Neither partner is lying. Neither is the villain. What's frequently underneath this specific pattern, not always, but often enough that clinicians recognize it immediately, is undiagnosed or unmanaged ADHD in one partner, interacting with a dynamic that researchers and couples therapists sometimes informally call the parent-child dynamic, where one partner takes on increasing responsibility for tracking, reminding, and managing, while the other feels increasingly criticized and infantilized despite genuinely wanting to do better. Today we're covering how ADHD shows up across relationships, parenting, and career. Not to catastrophize, but because understanding the actual mechanism, as we've done throughout this course, is what allows real repair and real strategy rather than blame in either direction. Let's start with romantic relationships. Research on ADHD's impact on relationship satisfaction has consistently found that couples where one partner has unmanaged ADHD report lower relationship satisfaction on average, and specific patterns show up repeatedly. Forgotten commitments and promises, which the non-ADHD partner often interprets, understandably but often inaccurately, as a sign of not caring. Difficulty with sustained attention during conversations, which can feel to a partner like disinterest, even when it reflects the same attention regulation difficulty we've discussed throughout this course, rather than a lack of investment in the relationship, and impulsivity affecting shared decisions, from finances to scheduling. On the other side, the partner without ADHD frequently reports taking on a disproportionate share of household and administrative responsibility, which breeds resentment even when done out of love and necessity, and can evolve into exactly the parent-child dynamic we opened with, a dynamic that damages intimacy and desire on both sides, since it's very difficult to feel romantically drawn to someone you're also managing like a dependent. Here's what actually helps, based on both clinical research and couples therapy approaches, adapted specifically for ADHD-affected relationships. First, externalizing shared responsibilities using the same principles from last episode. A shared visible calendar, shared task management systems, rather than relying on either partner's memory, removes a significant source of conflict because it stops making forgetfulness a referendum on love and turns it into a solvable logistics problem. Second, explicit, direct communication rather than assumed understanding. ADHD-related difficulty picking up on subtle social or emotional cues means that indirect hints or passive expectations often simply don't land the way they would with a partner whose attention and social processing work differently, and clear, direct requests tend to work far better than hoping something will be inferred. Third, separating the person from the symptom in both directions. The non-ADHD partner learning that forgetfulness often isn't a measure of love, and the partner with ADHD taking real ownership of managing their condition, rather than treating diagnosis as an excuse that ends the conversation. Diagnosis explains, it doesn't excuse indefinitely, and that distinction matters enormously for relationship repair. Now let's talk about parenting. Both parenting as an adult with ADHD and parenting a child who also has it, since ADHD has a well-documented genetic component and frequently runs in families. Many adults, as we saw with the grandmother in episode 3, first recognize their own ADHD only after their child gets diagnosed. Parenting with ADHD presents real, specific challenges. The sustained, often monotonous organizational demands of managing a household and a child's schedule can be exhausting for an attention system that struggles with exactly that kind of routine, non-novel task. But there's also a documented advantage worth naming honestly. A parent with ADHD who has done their own work in understanding and managing the condition often brings a distinctive kind of empathy and pattern recognition to parenting a child with similar traits. Understanding from lived experience what generic parenting advice frequently misses about that child's internal experience. Now, career. This is genuinely a mixed picture, and an honest course has to represent both sides, rather than presenting ADHD as purely a liability. On the challenge side, research on employment outcomes for adults with unmanaged ADHD shows higher rates of job changes, underemployment relative to actual skill and intelligence level, and disciplinary issues related to missed deadlines or organizational lapses, echoing exactly the patterns we saw with Marcus in episode 1 and James in episode 3. On the strength side, and this deserves real airtime, research and extensive clinical observation both point to certain genuine advantages associated with ADHD traits in the right environment. Strong, divergent, and creative thinking, since a brain that naturally makes unusual associative leaps between ideas is well suited to creative and innovative work. Strong performance in high stimulation, dynamic, crisis response environments, since these environments provide exactly the external urgency and novelty that supports task engagement, which is part of why fields like emergency medicine, entrepreneurship, journalism, and skilled trades see a meaningful number of highly successful adults with ADHD and genuine resilience and adaptability built from years of navigating a world not designed for how their brain works. The clinical and career counseling perspective here is about fit, not fixing. The goal isn't to force an ADHD brain into a role built for a different kind of attention system and then treat the resulting struggle as a personal failing. It's identifying roles and environments, variety, some built-in structure, meaningful stakes or deadlines, some autonomy that work with the brain's actual tendencies while still building the organizational scaffolding from the last episode for the parts of any job that require sustained routine attention, since no job is entirely free of that. Let's ground this in 2 examples. First example, Carla and Miguel, married 8 years, sought couples therapy specifically citing constant fighting about chores and forgotten plans as their presenting complaint. Miguel had been diagnosed with ADHD in his 20s but had never really engaged with treatment beyond an initial prescription he'd stopped taking. Therapy revealed the classic parent-child dynamic. Carla had become the default manager of literally everything in their shared life, from bills to their toddler's pediatrician appointments, and had grown to resent Miguel deeply despite still loving him, while Miguel felt like nothing he did was ever enough and had started avoiding taking on responsibilities at all since he expected to fail at them anyway. Their actual treatment involved Miguel re-engaging with both medication and the coaching strategies from episode 7 and the couple jointly building an externalized shared task system rather than relying on Carla's memory and reminders. Importantly, therapy also addressed the accumulated resentment directly rather than assuming better systems alone would resolve years of built-up hurt. Both pieces mattered. Second example, Jordan, 36, had been fired from 2 jobs in traditional corporate roles with heavy routine administrative demands and rigid 9-to-5 structure, each time receiving feedback about missed deadlines and inconsistent performance despite clearly strong intelligence and creativity, evident in performance reviews that praised his ideas while criticizing his execution. After diagnosis and treatment, Jordan made a deliberate career shift into freelance graphic design, a field offering project-based variety, built-in external deadlines from clients, and meaningful autonomy over his working hours and environment. This wasn't a magic fix. He still uses the organizational systems from last episode rigorously, and medication plays a real role in his day-to-day functioning, but the fundamental fit between his ADHD presentation and his career structure changed his trajectory substantially, illustrating the fit-not-fixing principle in practice. Let's address the misconceptions specific to this topic. Misconception 1. A good enough partner or employee with ADHD would simply try harder and stop causing these problems. This repeats the same fundamental misunderstanding we corrected in episode 1, applied now to relationships and careers specifically. Treating a documented executive function difference as if it were simply a matter of insufficient effort or care, when the underlying mechanism is neurological, not motivational. Misconception 2. ADHD is purely a liability in the workplace, with no upside. This is an incomplete and needlessly pessimistic picture. The research on ADHD-associated strengths, creativity, crisis performance, resilience is real. And career fit substantially changes outcomes, as illustrated in Jordan's example. Misconception 3. Diagnosis alone should fix relationship or career problems. Diagnosis is the starting point for understanding, not an automatic solution. As we saw with Carla and Miguel, real change typically requires active engagement with treatment, communication work, and often addressing accumulated relational damage that occurred before diagnosis. Diagnosis explains the past, but doesn't automatically repair it. Practical takeaways. In relationships, externalize shared responsibilities, communicate directly rather than relying on inference, and separate the symptom from the person's love or commitment, while still holding real accountability for engaging with treatment. In parenting, recognize both the real challenges and the real empathy advantage a self-aware ADHD parent can bring. In career, pursue fit over force. Look for roles offering variety, structure, and meaningful stakes, rather than assuming any job should simply be pushed through with more effort. And remember that diagnosis is a starting point for change, not an automatic resolution of years of accumulated impact. We've now covered an enormous amount of ground across this course. What ADHD actually is, how it's portrayed online, why it's missed for so long, how it's distinguished from anxiety, how it's properly evaluated, how it's treated with medication and without, how it plays out in daily systems, and how it touches relationships and career. In our final episode, we're going to do something different. We're going to take the 10 most persistent myths about adult ADHD, many of which we've already touched on throughout this course, and settle each one clearly, directly, and for good, bringing this entire course to its conclusion.